All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we're going to be continuing the different duties that Imam can do. Of course, when we speak about Imam, oftentimes people would think that it's just an honorable thing, but it's not. Yes, it is an honorable thing, but it's also a responsibility. So it's a tashrif or taklif. It's a taklif more than it is tashrif. But certainly because it carries because it carries within it some tashrif, such as putting those that are elderly to lead or giving honor to a person that owns the house, all of these different things. Definitely, there's no doubt that in imama also carries within it some position of honor. Okay, but even with this honor that the person may carry, whether it's the honor on Yawm al-Qiyamah, when the Prophet ﷺ said that three persons will be on the hillock of musk on the day of resurrection, the one who leads the prayer, and that they're all pleased with him. So definitely, in other words, there's a certain honor that the person is actually doing this position, certainly, but it's also an honor on Judgment Day. And the Prophet ﷺ said, أَنَّ لَهُ الْأَجْرُ مِثْلَ أَجْرِ مَنْ صَلَّى خَلْفَهُ. That the Prophet ﷺ had said that the person doing that imamah, that they would actually get the reward of their own basically prayer, and also the prayer of those that are following him. So in other words, it does have some honor as well. But at the same time, okay, there are certain qualifications that the person must take in consideration, such as the Prophet ﷺ said, أَنْتَ إِمَامُهُمْ وَاقْتَدِ بِأَضْعَفِهِمْ. You are the person that is in leadership, but you want to make sure that while you are leading them, that you're actually taking the weakest of them, okay, the weakest of them as the ones that you're going to take in consideration. That is, what does it mean to take in consideration? You're going to follow along with the weakest one. You know that there is a weak one there. They can't necessarily stand for too long. Use that as kind of like your compass on how long can that person stand for. And you don't want to burden, the people that you're leading, and make sure your followers are capable of moving on with what you're doing, whether it's a long prayer, short prayer, or possibly long sujood, short ruku or sujood, whatever it is. Okay, so if a person knows that they are qualified, then in that situation, they can actually ask to be the imam. Pause right there. There are actually differences of opinions on that. Where and why? What does that mean? What do you mean there are differences of opinions? And how do we understand that? Just give me a second. If I know that I'm qualified to hold a certain position, can I actually apply to ask for that job? Let's say I know I'm qualified to teach a class, or I know I'm qualified to maybe run a school, or I'm qualified to, can I actually apply for that? Or I know that I can be a great imam. I've got a beautiful voice. I got the ability to be the imam, and I have this degree and that degree, and plus I memorize the Quran. So can I actually consider myself as more qualified than others, and therefore apply to be the imam, or even ask to be the imam, and basically lay out my qualifications? Now, there are differences of opinions in that regard. Why? Because of different texts that tell us, let's say, different statements. So let's look at some of those statements. Okay, the Prophet ﷺ in hadith number 1, we're going to lay out a number of different hadith and try to read this data. What do we get out of it? Hadith number 1, the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever is granted the position of being a judge, in other words, a certain position, then they would be slaughtered without a knife. من ولي القضاء فقد ذبح بغير سكين. Another quote, the Prophet ﷺ said, we do not give these positions to people that seek it. Okay, people that seek it. Number 3, Prophet Yusuf, عليه السلام, he basically said, اجعلني على خزائن الأرض. Let me be the treasurer. Why? Because I am, literally said, that he is Hafiz and that he's Amin. Okay. Text number 5. Abu Dhar, he went to the Prophet ﷺ and said, give me a position. In other words, make me a person of leadership. And the Prophet ﷺ tells Abu Dhar, innaka da'if. You are weak, and on Judgment Day, it is khizyun wa nadama. On Judgment Day, it is a place of humility, and it is a place that people will regret. Now, reading through these texts, scholars actually had differences of opinions whether it is permissible to seek a position or not. Opinion number 1 said, you cannot seek a position because the second you seek a position, that would actually mean we know your intention is to be in that position, and therefore we cannot nominate you for such a position because we know that you have some interests. And these interests may not be in the interest of the masses. Opinion number 1. And plus, our interpretation on that is, here it is, all those ahadith or ayat, they're basically telling me, number 1, if you were to seek that position as if you were slaughtered without a knife, and number 2 is basically telling me that if somebody is seeking that position, then they would basically not be given that position because that would reveal that their interest to actually use it in different ways and not necessarily for the public interest. Number 3, as for your evidence on Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, that was his sharia and not our sharia. Okay. Now, the other opinion basically said, no, there's nothing wrong with seeking that position if the person was qualified for it. What's the evidence? They said, well, as for the first one, if you were talking about a person that seek to be in that position, it is not qualified for it. How did you get there? They said, well, the inference. If the person is not qualified and they were seeking it for dunya, how do we know? Well, we could study their background, we could make sure, but if the person is qualified, and if we're not putting in the qualified people for that position, then we're basically going to end up with people that are not qualified, which is going to be a far worse result. Then in that situation, why can't we hire and put in people that are qualified? That's the second opinion, basically debating on that. And as for the evidence for Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, surely you said that it was basically the time of Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, but don't we get the inspiration from them? We get the inspiration from them. So why can't we necessarily say that here's a good inspiration, and that's something to help us see that it is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically give us some certain ethics and inspirations to see through that. So then we would say, that is the second opinion group, saying we would say that here it is. We've got the evidence to support that it's permissible and that it's ethical to ask for being the imam or being in a certain position, because if you recognize that you've got the qualification to do so, that it's permissible to actually seek that position, And if the person is qualified, that they would be given basically the reward for seeking that position and also doing the duties that they are asked to do. Okay. In other words, if a person is qualified, according to the second opinion, and they are capable of doing those duties, then it would be permissible to seek that position and actually take that position and also be given that responsibility. In other words, we can nominate them, and if they know of their qualification, that رحم الله امرئ عرف قدر نفسه. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless the person that knew their honor, their position, their qualification, and therefore consider that as and consider that as basically something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given us the qualification, given us the duty to recognize our qualification and to put it in the right place, and therefore it would not be a sin. According to the second opinion, the first opinion considered that no, if they're seeking it, then don't give it to them because they might have other interests. Okay, so just to lay out all of those areas. Okay, now, and of course, here when we're speaking about to be the Imam, okay, leading a prayer is completely different than the qualifications to probably leading maybe a country or leading perhaps maybe a company. All of those, they have their qualifications and are completely different than being the Imam, because the Imam has different qualifications than a person leading a company or leading a country. Okay, just wanted to note that one. And let's see. So the first one, we did talk about, for example, male, female. We talked about last time. We talked about a slave. We talked about people that don't have fiqh. We talked about a person that is illiterate. So we talked about those other things. But let's just see right now. Let's see this one. وَجَعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا. Here's their evidence. That is the second opinion. وَجَعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا. Prophet Ibrahim عليه السلام making the dua. وَجَعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا. Make us the imam for المتقين. Was that really Prophet Ibrahim? Well, he was making a similar dua, but that was actually about Ibadur Rahman, that they were the ones that are making the dua. So I might actually be wrong on whether that was Prophet Ibrahim actually saying that or not. But وَجَعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا is also the dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had endorsed, regardless of who said it. Okay? Whether it's Ibadur Rahman or whether it's a prophet that had said it, وَجَعَلْنَا, and make us for the pious one, and except for the pious ones and the righteous, make us be the ones to be the leaders. In other words, I don't want to be just any good person, but no, I want to be the top. I want to be on the top. I want to be on the highest level. So when you talk about a leader, is this necessarily exclusive to leading in prayer? Or is this including different areas of leadership, possibly maybe in a country, maybe in a company, or maybe we're going on a camp together. This person is the leader for the camp, or we're, all those different areas. Okay, so just to see that. And therefore, if we're saying وَجْعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا, here it is, this person is, the inference at least, is seeking that position to be in leadership, that position to be on top of these groups, because they want it to be the Imam. Okay, they want it to be the Imam. And certainly the person that is in that position, they have to take in considerations. Number one is to give it what it really requires, meaning that they have to know what is required and be capable of recognizing their qualification. Are they going to be able to give what is needed or not? So if you are not qualified, perhaps maybe in political science, let's say, okay, you know nothing about political science, you know nothing about perhaps economy and all the different things that relate to that, then you cannot be a person that leads a country, for example, if you are not well informed, if you don't know how to manage a group of people, to be then the person that I'm going to lay out a vision, I'm going to lay out my idea and then become a dictator. Well, but that doesn't make you necessarily the pious leader, okay? Because you would have to take in consideration what is needed of you, and that's how we would determine whether you are qualified for that position or job or not. We first have to know, well, what is needed? What is required? What is needed in order to bring about stability, to bring about the best? And therefore, we would say your qualification to know whether you fit the prerequisites for this job or not. And that's going to determine. So that's what it means, that to basically give it what is required, what is necessary for that position. And therefore, if the person is not giving those responsibilities, then that person would basically be considered as an oppressive ruler. Oppressive ruler. Why oppressive? Oppressive because this person is not qualified to be in that position and is in a position that they're not actually qualified to be in. Okay. So it's very important. And by the way, you know, certain positions, I'll give you an example. There are certain, maybe in something that you and I could see, okay? There are certain positions that require scholars. Other positions, they don't necessarily require scholars, but they require experts in other fields. Let's say, for example, you've got a person that is a great scholar in fiqh, but when it comes to probably leading in a hospital, they're definitely not the people that are qualified to be in there, because leading and managing a hospital requires another expertise, a completely different qualification. And that's the same thing. If we're speaking about a hospital, we're also same thing talking about leading a government. Just because this person is an expert in fiqh doesn't necessarily mean that they're qualified to lead in that area. Because leading within a country is completely different than giving a dars. When you're giving a dars, it's all about theory. Okay. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're qualified to lead in a government. Government is another completely, it's a completely different area in a completely different expertise. Okay. Okay. So for the Imam, for at least, let's say, Salah, number one is that the person has to take in consideration the situation that the people are in. Maybe they were on a camp, they're all tired, it's too hot. Maybe they still didn't use the bathrooms yet, and you guys were trying to find the bathrooms or whatever it is. And we could see that the Prophet ﷺ, when he was leading in the different armies, he was taking those in consideration. That people are tired, that people are thirsty, that people are dehydrated, that people are hungry, that people are probably needing some time to rest or whatever it is, and was taking all of that in consideration and making, whether it's a long prayer or a short prayer, in consideration. Same thing if we're talking about, well, today was, let's say, maybe a weekend and people are tired, or people are ready because today is a weekend. They can get a good night's sleep tomorrow. and therefore we can make longer dua or longer prayer, etc. So taking in consideration perhaps a weekend, a weekday, or perhaps maybe the situation that everyone is in, is also part of the imam. Okay, and certainly it all comes in with the Prophet ﷺ said, إذا صلى أحدكم بالناس فليخفف فإن فيهم السقيم والضعيف وذا الحاجة وإذا صلى لنفسه فليطول ما شاء. The Prophet ﷺ in the hadith, he said, if any one of you leads in prayer, he should lighten it. I'm not sure if I would agree with the word lighten. We'll talk about it in just a bit. Among them are the weak, the old, and the one busy with his needs. And if anyone among you performs prayer alone, then he may prolong the prayer as much as he wishes. Okay, well, I mean, he should lighten it. I mean, shorten it would actually be a better term for it, because here takhfif is not to make it light, it's actually to make it shorter. Okay, takhfif as-salat, to make the prayer shorter. It doesn't mean to make the prayer shorter meaning, how about we skip our sujood for today? No, that doesn't that doesn't mean to skip sujood or to skip ruku'. This is actually talking about making the prayer basically shorter, in a sense of we're reading less in salah. We're reading less in salah to make it not long for them. Okay, and فإن فيهم السقيم والضعيف وذا الحاجة. السقيم is basically the ill, الضعيف is basically the weak one, ذا الحاجة is basically the person that may need to run home because maybe a child is ill, or they probably need to get to their job fast, because of course they were only given, let's say, this window to basically go to Jum'ah in, and they have to basically run back to work. So here we go. This is the hajj. Okay. And if you're praying alone, then pray and prolong the prayer as much as you want. So that's why yutawwil. So that explains yutawwil, and that yukhaffif is the opposite in this situation. فَلْيُطَوِّل. So then therefore فَلْيُخَفِّف is going to be in this situation the synonym for فَلْيُخَفِّف. It's not to lighten it, it's to shorten it. Okay, because the opposite was فَلْيُطَوِّل, to make it long. Okay, let's see. The Prophet ﷺ in another hadith, he said, "In أيها الناس إن منكم منفرين فأيكم أما الناس فليوجز فإن فيهم الضعيف والكبير وذا الحاجة." He said, some of you, oh people, some of you make people dislike good deeds, the congregational prayer, that is. So whoever among you leads people in prayer, they should shorten it, not lighten it, because among them are the weak, the old, and one busy with his needs. So what does that mean? The Prophet ﷺ was considering the people that were, I guess, making the prayer too long, the prayer hard on people, etc. That he's saying that he's making the people munaffirin. He's making people dislike good deeds. In other words, what is that supposed to mean? How do we apply this in other areas? So even in fiqh, for example, when you're teaching Islam, and I've seen this very many times, there's a difference, okay, between giving fatawas that are not, let's say, considerable fatwas, meaning they don't have evidence on that from Quran or Sunnah, and were not mentioned by scholars, in between. So that would be a fatwa that doesn't come from Islam. But then the person might say, well, I'm just making it easy on people. In between a fatwa that, no, there is a basis for that fatwa, and that, well, not only Quran and Sunnah, but other scholars had also stated it. So in that situation, okay, that's a considerable fatwa. So when a person is giving durus, for example, this is important. you can be leading prayer, even though prayer is supposed to be a good thing. But just because it's a prayer, it doesn't mean that through prayer, you may be actually a person that is provoking people to dislike good deeds, even though it's a good thing. And that's one thing that I had seen, to be honest, in masajid, that, without naming names, there would be these sisters that are probably new Muslimas, okay? And then another sister, for example, is, they're new Muslim, and she's basically giving them durus about bid'ah and how it's a bid'ah to visit graves and all of that. It's not like the Americans are obsessed with visiting graves, and how dangerous bid'ah is and all of that. And, and how important it is to wear black, and how important it is to cover your face, and how bid'at kashf al-wajh and all of that. It's like, are you really recognizing the situation that these people are in? It's uncovering the face is a considerable opinion. And to right now, for a new Muslim, and actually start with the hijab, let's call it the, certainly, I mean, myself, I cover, but at the same time, I consider the opinion that had mentioned that it was a sunnah as a considerable opinion, even if I would take the strict opinion, or quote unquote, okay, because I wouldn't necessarily describe it as strict, but let's call it, the more conservative opinion, let's call it that way, okay, and cover the face. That doesn't necessarily mean that we would not consider the situation that these people are in, and not consider that they are not yet ready for such a step. So when you look at this one, inna minkum munaffirin, that some of you let people run away from what is considered a good act. So the Prophet said, فَأَيُّكُمْ أَمَّا النَّاسِ فَلْيُوجِزْ. If you actually are leading a prayer, then make it something that is short. In other words, taking into consideration the circumstances that they're in. And that's the same thing. Taking the circumstances that they are in, possibly younger generation, maybe teenagers, maybe perhaps new Muslims, maybe Muslims that are not strong enough to take in possibly stronger rules and more conservative rulings, and etc. So these are to be taken in consideration when giving a halaqah, when giving a fatwa, when, just those areas, even if it was during prayer, that those things are to be taken in consideration. Okay. Anas ibn Malik, he also said, ما صليت خلف إمام قط أخف صلاة ولا أتم صلاة من النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. The Anas ibn Malik, so he was basically what? He was witnessing. He said, I never performed a prayer, and a prayer perfect as I performed behind the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What did he want to say? He was basically witnessing right there that it wasn't necessarily long, and that it was something that was basically perfect, yet short, yet it suited basically what you needed as an Iman dose. Okay, let's see. Al-Hafiz, who's Al-Hafiz? That's Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar. He said, whoever, let's see where he says, and here he just says Al-Hafiz, that's okay. Whoever follows the way of the Prophet and leads the people in prayer, performing it as light and perfect as the Prophet's prayer, those behind him in prayer will not complain. Lightening the prayer should go along with making it perfect in integral parts, obligatory acts, and acts of sunnah, prophetic tradition. Yet lightening, i.e. shortening the prayer, is a relative matter traced back to the Prophet ﷺ and the way that he used to do. Maintain and order us with, and should not be related to the wishes of those who led the prayer, which is of those led in prayer. Okay, so what does that mean? It's supposed to be based on the sunnah. In other words, even, yes, I was talking earlier about giving fatwa, okay, and answering the questions, or even possibly leading younger generation, or possibly giving durus for new Muslims or whatever. We don't change the fatwa. We're not changing the fatwa. I'm not saying make new fatwas to make it easier on the people. We're not making things easier on the people and changing the religion to suit the likes of the people. That's, if a person would do that, that's zandaqa. That's a type and a level of fiqh. To actually change the religion in order to get more followers and more likes, that's a form of zandaqa. What you are doing is that you are taking considerable opinions. You're basically tracing back to the Prophet ﷺ. That's what you're doing. If you want to be strict and more strict on yourself and possibly on your own family, depending on the situation, okay, then that's actually taking the safe side. But not everybody is ready to take the safe side. Okay, so that's why it's important to look at what al-Hafidh ibn Hajar had said, and he was saying that, no, when we're speaking about making something easy on the people, that is to be in the lens, in the light of Quran and Sunnah, and not to be in the lens of what people are seeking and what people want you to say. You don't change the religion in order to get more followers, or change the religion in order to get more acceptance and people tolerating you, because that's a form of zandaqa. Okay, so, and of course, certain scholars actually said the same thing. So let's see. So when we're speaking about making it shorter, what are we actually talking about here? Okay, so number one is that you would do 3 tasbih. That's the shortest. Subhana Rabbi al-Azim, Subhana Rabbi al-Azim, Subhana Rabbi al-Azim. That's differences of opinions between scholars, by the way. Some scholars actually, like the Hanafi method, they regarded that what is needed is to actually do the movement and not necessarily do the words. Okay, that's for Madhab Hanafi. So, and some scholars said that what is obligatory is 1 tasbihah, that is making Subhana Rabbi al-Azim, Subhana Rabbi al-A'la, depending on ruku or sujood, okay, and not necessarily 3. For Madhab Hanbali, they regarded that, no, the least is 3. That's why he said, well, 3 is the least, okay? And of course, when we're speaking about salah, how long are we talking about in terms of qira'ah? How long should the recitation after? Do we omit the Fatiha? No. Can we read half the Fatiha? No. That is never permissible. But people are wanting that. Yeah, that's what they want. But what they want is not the compass that we would use in order to consider what is right. So what is the compass? The compass is Quran and Sunnah. That's our compass. Quran and Sunnah is basically the compass to define and to tell us what is conservative, what is not conservative. And certainly, if we might not know what is conservative, what is less conservative, and all of that, we would also use the lens of scholars. The lens that scholars basically had mentioned, the different madhahib, to help us see and make sure that we're not using our own lens, or let's say getting that pressure from the masses. And this is something really important to take in consideration, especially during our times. Ladies, listen to this one. Especially during our times, there's a lot of pressure to somehow get acceptance. With the pressure, I'm actually talking about taking in areas that it's halal. There's nothing wrong with it. And if you say this is halal, that's halal, that's halal, whoever just takes too much of halal, they're going to find themselves as falling into haram without them realizing. Not because it's halal, it doesn't mean I consume too much of it. Consuming too much of halal in itself is a form of fiqh. Why? Because you're supposed to limit even the halal. You're supposed to limit the halal, whether consumption or the amount that you spend on halal. Okay, just put that one in consideration. Let's say, Ibn Daqiq al-Eid. Ibn Daqiq al-Eid, one of the most, one of the most important scholars, and inshallah one day we'll actually talk about him. One of the most intelligent scholars, by the way. Okay, he said that, let's see, here it is. The view of the fuqaha maintaining that the Imam should not pronounce tasbih more than thrice does not contradict what is reported of the Prophet ﷺ, that he said that tasbih more than thrice, this is because the Prophet ﷺ used to prolong the prayer, fulfilling his companions' wish of gaining more good deeds, in which does not make the prayer a prolonged one, in which those who are led may complain. Okay, so what does that mean? All right. In other words, we will take in consideration the followers' wishes, but only if it does not contradict the rulings of Quran and Sunnah. Okay? So in other words, we would basically look into al-maslaha. What is that? In other words, we would add or increase based on al-maslaha within the parameters of Sunnah, and of course, how do we understand Sunnah? That's why the opinion scholars are important. The opinion scholars are important because they would help us understand and basically and basically take that in consideration. Take that in consideration, meaning that the scholars would help us understand the inference and the text basically in the right way. Help us understand the text and the inference in the right way, and therefore not making our own judgment or perhaps the pressure that we are living under, possibly from the followers or the masses. And this is extremely important because we see this all the time, where people would change the fatwa, or even change the classes just to gain publicity. Or probably right now with all the different things on social media in order to gain more followers. We're going to do this. A girl basically wearing hijab. Yeah, she's wearing hijab, but then basically making certain movements and doing all these different things. That's not at all going in accordance with hijab. That's not going in accordance with hijab, because hijab is supposed to be something that conceals not only your appearance, but also conceals your movements as well, to not bring attraction. Okay? So taking these things in consideration are also important. So we would say, especially, sorry ladies, but this is especially women. Women, even it's quite interesting. I was actually looking at and studying the psychology of boys and girls on social media. Girls usually portray themselves. So usually girls take selfies. It's all about me. Okay? It's all about herself, what she's doing, what movement she's trying to get attraction. They lack confidence. So she's trying to gain acceptance and endorsement from others. She would get convinced of her beauty if others had basically confirmed that it is there. Okay? She would get confidence about her opinion if other people had approved it. Okay. The boys, they don't care. The boys, they would, the picture, even when you look at the picture, the image would be from far. It wouldn't be too close. Okay. The image is far, not too close. Usually he's probably, I don't know, maybe jumping up a hill or probably on a skateboard or, just doing a certain movement. Okay. What are they trying to display? They're trying to display power, trying to display ability. Okay. Girls are trying to display themselves, trying to display appearance. Okay. And what do the girls actually seek? And that's why I'm actually pro. Yes, I will say it straightforward. I'm actually pro, or let me say I'm against the appearance of women on social media. I'll say you can consider it conservative. You can consider, I'm actually against it. Because definitely when you see hijab, okay, you see hijab, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had obligated hijab because of the impact, not only on the society, but even on herself. Or else how can we understand even if the woman was alone? Okay. Even if she was alone, she would have to wear the hijab for prayer. It's basically to help her focus on herself within. As women, many times that attraction, that appearance, and making that our focus is basically a fitna. And that's one thing I would say. I'm against women putting photos of themselves, even if it's a simple photo, simple photos of themselves, unless it was, just letting people, for example, know who you are. There's a difference between a photo that contains, let's say, a public figure, a very decent photo, and between a photo that basically is trying to display something else, trying to display another thing. And you could say, we've had women actually make up with their husbands on social media and thinking that, yeah, it's basically a halal relationship. No, you don't display that. And same thing, you don't display yourself, even if you were wearing a hijab, on social media and make it on a public platform. People may consider it as conservative, but I think that this needs to be something that is, let me say, courageous to say, rather than always shy to say such opinions that might actually be not the preferred by the majority. We don't say the opinions based on the majority's preference. We would say the opinion that is on the majority's interest. The majority's interest. And here, since I'm as basically a woman in speaking about women issues, I would say I would definitely say that putting out women's pictures, even if it's in a decent position, I would recommend against it. Try not to display yourself, and always keep yourself as somebody that is in place of honor. Don't display yourself. You're not a place of display. That's what Islam wanted you, not a place of display. Okay. Okay, let's continue right there. Okay, let's continue right there. And it is the sunnah to read, of course, and do in tartil. What is it, tartil? A tartil is basically not too fast and not too slow. Okay, there's al-hadr, and that's to read extremely fast. And there is al-tahqiq, which is reading very slow. Okay, and there is al-tadwir, which is a little faster. Tartil is pretty much you're reading not too slow and not too fast. That's basically tartil. Okay. And as well as giving enough time, even if the Imam finished his, let's say, tashahhud or maybe Salat al-Ibrahimiyya or doing what he's doing, that, give some time, even if it's just a time of pause, just until everyone else is finished, that's okay too. Even if we're speaking about the qira'ah itself, to give some time of pause for the people that are following along to basically be given the time to be able to complete their qira'ah. Okay. Now, the other thing is that it is part of the sunnah that the person would prolong the first rak'ah. What's the evidence? Abu Qatada had basically said, كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يطول في الركعة الأولى. The hadith is basically narrated by Bukhari and Muslim that the Prophet ﷺ used to prolong the first rak'ah. Why prolong the first rak'ah? Because people are trying to make it up for probably being in salah, but then they may not have been able to, I guess, get to the first prayer, get to the beginning of the prayer. So you're giving a chance basically in the first rak'ah for those that came a little late to basically follow along. Okay. And it is basically also recommended for the Imam if he would feel that some people are trying to follow along, or some people are, they're hearing footsteps basically of people coming in, etc., that they would basically, that is, the Imam would basically not walk slower, but the Imam would basically prolong the qira'ah in order to let those that are trying to come in and make it for the salah. And making it probably for salah, that they would at least, of course, you're hearing people's footsteps, you're hearing people trying to make it for salah, just basically focus to prolong at least the first rak'ah. So when you stop hearing footsteps coming in, you're basically capable of allowing those that are trying to make it to salah actually make it for salah. So once you stop hearing footsteps, then you're probably moving on. Okay, so that's what the Prophet ﷺ would do. Okay, so of course, in general, and this is in conclusion, at least in this situation, basically put into account the different circumstances of those performing the prayer along with the Imam, and therefore should keep to completing and perfecting the prayer, of course, in accordance with that. And that was the Prophet ﷺ's sunnah. Okay, so we're going to move on to another important topic, and which basically is the people that have excuses. What do we mean by the people that have excuses? We're talking about people that may be ill, people traveling, or people living in some fear of something. What does that look like? There are certain situations, could be the elderly, maybe they can't pray and keep their wudu for a long time, or maybe it's hard for them to redo wudu all the time, and especially those that might have maybe constant bleeding, or maybe they can't get up to the bathroom frequently, or probably, there are these different issues that, of course, the religion and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had taken in consideration. And certainly there are those circumstances that in the religion had actually taken in consideration. And certainly those circumstances were to make it easy on the followers, easy on the Muslims. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had mentioned in a couple texts that the religion was not there to make things harder on people, but to make it something that is easy, to make it something that is bringing ease to them, but not at the expense of the text itself. So in other words, not because you want to make the religion easy. And people would use this often and would take the text out of its context. They would say, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرَ وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that He wants things to be easy and not hard. So therefore, don't make it hard on people and let them and tell them that wearing hijab is obligatory. Don't make that. No, you're taking the text out of context. This would be that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us ease within Sharia. So yes, Sharia itself is actually containing the ease. So if Islam ordered, for example, to pray even if you are ill, then that means we're going to consider that that is ease. That's not hardship. But at the same time, there are certain things in Sharia that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said, وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said that within the deen, He did not make it a burden. In other words, Sharia itself, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Sharia itself is not ordering you to do something that is beyond your ability, beyond your capacity. Sharia itself is not ordering you with something that you cannot do. It's within the parameters of your ability, within the area of your capacity, and therefore, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. Do as much as you can, have that taqwa, apply a faith as much as you can. And the Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا أَمَرْتُكُمْ بِأَمْرٍ فَأْتُوا مِنْهُ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. If I ordered you in anything, then do as much as I ordered you to do. And therefore, we would take in consideration certain circumstances as follows. Number one, a person that is ill. A person that is ill, they could be ill to probably maybe do frequent wudu, maybe ill to do certain movements in salah, probably ill to do certain requirements, etc., or probably timing is something that is a burden for them. So that's what we would take in consideration and as follows. Of course, never is the prayer supposed to be at all that we would leave the prayer. So in that situation, the ill person would also have to do prayer. They're obligated to do prayer even if they are bedridden. And to say that, yeah, well, right now they're bedridden, why don't they just make it up after they're finished? Absolutely not. This is not the sunnah. Even if they're bedridden, they would have to do salah unless they're not capable of understanding. Then that's a different situation. They had, who knows, glioblastoma, and it affected their ability to understand. 1 second, they're 1 second, literally. I remember my uncle, he was 1 second, he's remembering who he is. The second later, literally a second later, a minute later, he completely forgets what he was doing. He was just completely out of it, could not remember what he was doing, where he was at, and all of that was just going blank. It was, a minute, this following minute's completely different, the third minute it's completely different, and everything just goes out the window. Okay, that's a different story, because if a person is not capable of understanding, okay, and that's part of understanding, then they're not mukallafin. Okay, then they're not held accountable. What is the manat al-taklif? Manat al-taklif is two things. What is manat al-taklif again? Manat al-taklif means the area, the center that would hold you accountable, are basically two things: reaching the age of puberty and having the mind. Okay, those are the main things. If you're mentally stable and you had reached the age of puberty, okay, and of course certainly you're Muslim, then in that situation you are held accountable. Okay, but if the person is not mentally sound, then in that situation, that would be a different story. So person probably, let's say, Alzheimer's, they're not fully aware of what they're saying. They're not fully aware of what they're doing. But of course, even Alzheimer's is at different stages. It's not the same stage all the time. If the stages that they're aware, and we can explain to them, etc. at one point, but then we explain to them within these 10 minutes they're okay, but then probably the 20 minutes later things are out the window. What we just talked about is completely out the window. Okay, then in that situation, are we capable of getting those windows when they're aware, they're awake of what, and aware of what they're doing? Can we get them to pray at that time? They don't have to make everything up, because when they were not aware, they weren't held accountable for it. Okay, let's see. But in general, just because a person is ill, that doesn't mean that they could leave prayer. Okay, and if they're capable of using things like a stick or in order to stand, then that would be permissible. But of course, ما لا يتم الواجب إلا به فهو واجب. What does that mean? This right here, ما لا يتم الواجب إلا به فهو واجب, is a key phrase right here. What does that mean? If something is obligatory and we cannot apply that obligation without that, then that becomes obligatory to use. Okay, let's see. If a person is ill and they couldn't stand in salah, then in that situation, if what does it mean if somebody is ill? Like, how much of an illness are we actually talking about? The amount of illness that we're talking about is basically the amount, one, if the person is not capable of performing certain acts, or if performing certain acts is basically making it hard on them, or perhaps if they were to perform those acts in salah, it probably may increase the illness, or probably postpone and delay the healing process. That's what it means to be ill. That's what we're talking about. So, I'll tell you, just one time I was listening to the fatwa, okay? And this lady, basically calls this hotline fatwa number, okay? And this lady was saying that she was going through contractions, okay? And her water broke, and she was wondering if she can pray sitting down. The Imam said, well, at least this person that is answering the phone call, he said, no, that doesn't give you the fatwa to actually pray sitting down, and you would have to pray standing. Okay, even if you're going through contractions. That was actually no, seriously. If a person went through contractions, and especially after the water breaking, you would know what pain means. Every time I would be asked the pain 1 to 10. To me, 10 is after that water breaking, and those contractions after water, that's 10. If somebody did not go through that, I don't know if they really know what the amount of pain at a scale of 10 would feel like. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Okay. Hemorrhoids, I know that for sure, that they can go up to a scale of 10. Alhamdulillah, I didn't try every single disease, but this is just to give you an idea. Just to give you an idea of other pains. Okay. So if this person that answered that phone call and thought that after her water breaks and she's having these contractions, that she could still stand, I don't know if he really understands, and if he could really fathom or really have an idea of what this lady's asking about. My preference is, before you tell somebody whether they are in a good amount of pain or not, is let them decide. Let them decide, because they're the ones that are feeling the pain. And of course, pain, another woman might actually say delivery and labor is not that painful. I've had women actually say it wasn't that bad. And other women think that it was feeling like it was the worst pain ever. Toothache, somebody might say this is the worst. Other people might say, nah, that's not the worst. Okay. So at the end is that my recommendation is really to lay out that scale. If the person is not capable of performing a certain act, or it makes it harder for them to focus. Okay, if it makes it harder for them to focus, or probably delays the progress of their healing process, then in that situation, they're the ones to determine whether they're not capable of focusing, or whether the person is possibly maybe not able to focus due to pain. Excruciating pain is not allowing them to focus on their salah, and the amount of pain can be reduced. Let's say if they were not to do a certain movement or probably prolong the prayer, then they're the ones that are supposed to determine. Let the person determine, and not your understanding of the pain, because your understanding of the pain varies and it's a relative thing. You may go through that experience and not necessarily think it's the worst pain ever. Someone else may go through the experience and actually say this is the worst pain ever. So it's not for you and I to judge. It's basically the person himself to judge whether this really is taking away their focus, or whether an expert is telling me that it's going to delay the process, the healing process. Okay. So just keep that one in mind. Is it going to delay the healing process? What does this look like? And so forth. Okay. And this doesn't necessarily mean that the only times that a person can sit, the only time would be if they're not capable of doing so. Not accurate. It doesn't have to be that they're not capable of standing. It can be that it's basically more painful, or it delays the process of healing, or it basically is painful that they're not capable of focusing, and that the pain would be less if they were to possibly sit down. Okay, that the pain would be less if they were to sit down. Then in that situation, okay, we would consider al-mashaqqat al-zahira. Then in that situation, we would consider, okay, what are we talking about here in terms of hardship? Okay, but of course, all the scholars had agreed that if the person is not capable of standing in an obligatory prayer, that they could actually pray sitting down and they would not have to redo it. Okay, if they're not capable, and that they would not have less deeds for praying sitting down if they're not capable of standing. Okay, and then therefore the position that they would be praying in would basically be based on what they're capable of doing. Okay, if they're capable of sitting down on a chair, sit down on a chair. If they're not capable of sitting on a chair, they're capable of sitting on the floor, then sit on the floor. If to them, no, sitting on a stool is better, then in that situation, they would be the ones to determine, let's say, the next move that is basically within their capacity. Okay, but if the person is not capable of basically praying sitting down, and sitting down is also probably either having more pain or probably hardship, then in that situation, they could pray on their side. They can pray on their side, and that's for them, again, to basically determine how much of that are they really capable of doing. Okay. And of course, their face would be facing the Qibla, and it would be best if they could rest on their right side. Okay, they can rest on their right side. And yeah, I can totally relate. I broke my spine. This is real. Okay, I broke my spine when I was a young girl, and I can relate with that broken spine. Okay, and how painful it can be to actually move. And with, of course, alhamdulillah, I was healed, but alhamdulillah, I can relate to what it means to not be capable of even getting off bed or even moving from side to side. I had to have almost 4 nurses just move me from one side, the left side, to the right side, had to carry me because I was not capable, due to my broken spine, actually make those movements. Just imagine. Okay, alhamdulillah. Right now, that was what, how many years ago? 38 years ago. So alhamdulillah, right now, completely healed. Okay. Of course, if the person didn't have someone to let them face the qibla, no nurses were there, or nurses were on call, they were too busy to come to me, and I didn't want to miss my prayer, then in that situation, you would face whatever is easier for you. Okay. And if the person is not capable of praying on their side, then in that situation, they could pray on their back, and their feet would be towards the qibla. But of course, one thing is, it's so easy. It's so easy to sometimes speak of things being, at least, I would say, it's so easy to speak of things like, okay, then do this, change this position and that position. But when you're actually in it, you discover that it's not that easy, because I couldn't even move from not the right to the left. It was almost, in fact, it was impossible for me to do any movement, whatsoever. Even if I wanted to, probably, just turn myself just at a 20-degree or even a 5-degree angle, could not even do that. We're talking about a broken spine. Okay, could not even do that. And alhamdulillah, if the person is capable, of course, alhamdulillah, later, with the healing process, all of that, if you're capable of having your feet towards the qibla, okay, and actually pray that way, that would be okay. But of course, there are some certain situations that you can't even do that. Okay, so in that situation, that doesn't mean don't pray. It just means do whatever is within your capacity, whatever is possible. And sometimes, of course, in hospitals, they'll tell you that they cannot change the bed's position, because there are certain equipment that, whether we're talking about oxygen masks and all these different machines basically hooked to the bed. So sometimes you can't always have your the bed's position basically changed. Okay, it could be from one room to another is different, but many times they can't actually change the bed position because of the machines that are connected to it. So in that situation, certainly, if you're capable of facing qibla, do so. If you're capable of facing qibla with your head, with your face, then do so. If you're not capable of facing qibla with your face, then at least face your qibla with the feet. That's okay. If the person is basically praying, of course, sitting down, and they were not capable of making sujood on the floor, then they could pray, of course. They can basically make the gestures. So a gesture to make a ruku', and a body gesture that is lower than the ruku' gesture, that would basically resemble sujood. Okay, so that would basically be for the person. They have to sit on a stool, a chair, whatever, on a floor. Do they have to have their feet down? No, that's for you to decide. And certainly you want to mimic the salah position as much as possible. Okay, and in that situation, you would basically consider your circumstance plus the circumstances of salah. Okay, if the person is if the person is praying sitting down, and they're capable of making sujood, then it's not enough. Just because a person is praying sitting down, it doesn't mean that they could do a gesture of sujood. Okay, just keep that one in mind. So if they're not capable of making ruku', okay, possibly because they had disc, maybe, okay, but they're capable of making sujood, then make sujood, but don't do ruku' if you can't do ruku'. But if you're capable of doing, let's say, ruku' but not sujood, then do the ruku'. So not the whole prayer would be sitting down making a gesture of ruku' and sujood. If you're capable of doing one certain movement, then do that movement. If you're capable of doing ruku' but not sujood, then do ruku' and don't do sujood. If you're capable of making sujood but not ruku', then do the sujood and don't do the ruku'. Okay, so just taking consideration what you are capable of doing and not doing. Okay, where's the evidence on that? So this Sahabi basically had hemorrhoids, al-bawasir. Oh, those are disgusting, man. Those are extremely painful. Extremely painful. Okay, I would say hemorrhoids are as painful as labor, to be honest, if not even more, depending on the situation. Okay, so let's see. He asked the Prophet ﷺ about his hemorrhoids. The Prophet ﷺ said, when he asked him, well, at least that Sahabi asked him how he could perform the prayer. He said, "Salli qa'iman, فإن لم تستطع فصلي قاعدا فإن لم تستطع فعلى جنبك." He said, perform prayer while standing. And if you cannot perform it while sitting, and if you cannot even do that, then perform it lying on your side. Then perform it lying on your side. And of course, certainly, somebody with hemorrhoids, you can't sit down. It's too painful to even sit. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ya Rabbi, give cure to those that are ill. Allahumma ameen. Allahumma ameen. Okay. And certainly, those that probably had undergone surgeries, probably, or in the hospital, etc., they would, if they're not capable of making wudu, perhaps, and maybe there's some najasa on it, etc., that doesn't mean that you can't do salah. If you're not capable of removing the najasa, okay, you're going to pray even despite the najasa being on there. Okay, let's say somebody is on dialysis, okay, and certainly they're not capable of removing that najasa because they're on dialysis. Okay, then in that situation, just because you're on dialysis, it doesn't mean you cannot make the prayer. No, make the prayer even if you're on dialysis. Okay, even if you have probably constant bleeding or probably constant urine leakage or whatever it is, you're going to do the salah and you're going to disregard that najasa that is continuously there. Okay, so you're going to take that in consideration. Okay, so فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. Have that taqwa as much as you can. Okay, now to think that I'll just delay my salah until I'm completely healed, and no, that's actually not permissible in Islam, and you would have to actually pray it on time. Okay, let's say I'm just gonna move forward. What if the person is not capable of doing wudu? Okay, if the person is not capable of doing wudu, what does that mean? They could use tayammum. Tayammum, we talked about that before. Okay, to do tayammum would basically mean the person is using dry substance, which is soil, rocks, or possibly sand. You're using those as an alternative to water. If you cannot use water, you're not possibly, maybe one, you wouldn't be capable of using it, maybe because water slows down your treatment, or water gets you even more sick, or water is not accessible. Okay, those are the reasons that you could use tayammum for. Water is not accessible, or water prolongs the healing process, or you didn't have enough water. Okay, or it basically gets you more sick. So in that situation, you could use tayammum. Okay, but of course, here's the thing. If, for example, we're speaking about having certain abilities. If you've got certain abilities, then do what you're capable of doing. Let's say you're capable of washing your face, but not your hands. Okay. And you're capable of maybe, I don't know, wearing gloves and washing the other parts, but not your hands. Then in that situation, do what you're capable of doing and don't do the rest. Same thing when we're speaking about salah. Okay. Let's say, what about salat al-rakib? We did talk about wudu before, by the way. Let me just summarize what we talked about in terms of wudu before. We talked about wudu before, and we said that if a person is not capable of doing frequent wudu, what does that look like? We talked about something called al-jam'. What does that mean? So in situations where a person is not capable of whether it's movement, too many movements, or whether it's possibly maybe frequent wudu, let's say, is hard on them. Let's give an example. Let's say a woman is going through istihada, frequent bleeding. And if she were to do frequent wudu, it was too hectic. Okay. Or let's say an old woman, she's on certain painkillers because, she's more probably right now in hospice care or probably in palliative care. Okay. And she can't get up frequently to do that wudu. Okay. Then in that situation, we would say do what is called the jam' as-suri. What does that look like? Jam' as-suri would mean she would delay dhuhr till the last few minutes of dhuhr time. And that way she could pray dhuhr. And of course, now it's going to be asr time soon. Okay. Then she's going to pray asr right after it. Okay. And then for maghrib and isha, it's going to be delaying maghrib till the last few minutes and then praying isha at that time. Okay. So what are they doing? They're praying fajr on time. They're combining dhuhr and asr together, and they're combining maghrib and isha. And that way, it would be as if they had performed 3 prayers during the day. One really early in the morning, one in the afternoon, and one at least at nighttime, whenever they're awake. Okay. Ya Allah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give those that are ill healing. Allahumma ameen. Okay. So if the person, like we said, is in a situation where they're going through these hard circumstances and they're not capable of making wudu, same thing if we're talking about salah. They could be under these circumstances where they cannot wake up frequently to go and actually pray. Maybe because they're probably on these medications that are making them too sleepy, or probably getting up frequently, not just for tahara, but getting up frequently is very painful on them. Then in that situation, we would say this is that door or that window and that entrance or that exit for them to basically pray in a way that is within their ability to pray. Allahumma ya Rabbi, give cure for those that are ill. I went through a number of different illnesses. My body is a weak body, I guess. So I understand and fully can relate with those that are going through those times of severe and excruciating pain. All right, let's continue right there. Salat al-Rakib. What is a rakib? A rakib is basically a person that is riding something, okay? And the person that is not capable of going out of or probably off their transportation method, and perhaps they're not capable of due to danger, due to hardship, and actually, or possibly even because it's too wet, or let's say what those situations are. Okay, if the person is not capable of whether getting up or probably getting off that transportation mean due to possibly, we're talking about muddy floors, or muddy grounds, maybe it's raining, or possibly that if they were to get off that transportation mean, maybe the rest of the group might actually move on and leave them behind, or they're probably afraid of an enemy, or probably afraid of maybe a predator coming in or something like that. In that situation, they would just pray on whatever transportation mean that they're using, whether we're speaking about possibly maybe an animal, or probably maybe a car, a plane, or a train, whatever means that there is. Let's see. What is the hadith that's related to this? Ya'la ibn Murrah, that the Prophet ﷺ had basically come across, it was like a valley. So they were basically in this area, and this valley, it was him and his companions, basically the Prophet and the companions, and they were all certainly on their means of transportation, and the skies were basically flowing waters, and it was so muddy right underneath them, and it was time for prayer. And then of course they did the adhan, and the Prophet ﷺ basically had come forward with his own, basically, whether it's a horse or whether it's a camel, but basically come forth, stood in the front, basically, and then he would pray iman. In other words, with a body movement, but he was still sitting basically on that horse or that animal, basically, and they would do a body gesture to basically represent for sujood or for ruku'. And certainly the body gesture for sujood would be lower than that of the ruku'. Okay. But certainly at the end they would have to pray. Okay. And that's why they would face the qibla. وَحَيْثُمَا كُنْتُمْ فَوَلُّوا وُجُوهَكُمْ شَطْرَهُ. Wherever you may be, you would want to face your face towards that is the qibla. And certainly you would do the amount that is necessary for that salah. And because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. If the person is not capable of facing the qibla, then they would not have to face it if they're not capable of facing the qibla. So let's say there are certain planes. Okay, there are certain planes, they're the big planes. Okay, they would have a certain area, let's say, for the kitchen, for that area. But of course, if it's during traffic time, if it's what I mean traffic time, they're probably serving the food, they're probably serving, everyone else. The stewardess are really busy. So definitely don't pray at that time. Wait when it's possible for you to probably utilize that small space and probably pray. That's okay. They'll allow you if it's not during traffic time, and make sure you take in consideration, where you are on that plane. There are certain planes that are more jet planes. They're smaller. There's no space whatsoever, but you're capable of standing. But if you're really tall, I guess coming from Holland, really tall, and you're not capable of doing even body gestures of, or probably even standing, and you could only do it sitting down, then hey, if that's the only way that's possible for you, then do it sitting down. But if you're capable of standing, you're not too tall, and you're on this jet plane, and you're capable of standing at least for salah, but you're not capable of doing sujood, but you're capable of doing ruku'ah, well, then do the ruku'ah and don't do the sujood. Okay. So whatever you're capable of doing, do. Are you capable of facing the qibla? Well, on certain planes, you're capable of facing qibla. How would I know what the qibla is? Well, you could ask a stewardess to ask the captain, and they'll tell you where the qibla is. They would know for sure. If they're flying a plane, they would know where east and west is, I hope at least, because if they don't know, we're really in big trouble. You're on the wrong plane. Okay? That'd be really scary. Doesn't know where east and west is. Okay, they would tell you which way the qibla is. Okay, and if you're not capable of facing the qibla, because possibly maybe you're going the wrong direction, wrong direction. Okay, that's the wrong word. Guess going the direction against the qibla, and you're not capable of turning. Of course, the plane. You're not going to go against the plane. Okay, and it wasn't, within your ability to face the qibla, then pray as you are in. Okay. That's basically to make the story short. But certainly not because you're on a plane, it doesn't mean you could pray sitting down unless you are not capable of doing the standing. Okay. If you're not capable of doing the standing, then that's when you can sit down. But if you're capable of doing the core, then do the core. If you're not capable of doing sujood, well, then don't do the sujood if you're not capable of doing sujood. Okay. What about the person? That's the third situation is a person traveling. I think this is the last one. Okay. A person that is traveling, they would basically be given the permission to shorten the prayer from 4 prayers to making it 2 rak'ahs, from 4 rak'ahs to 2 rak'ahs. And we know that that was basically mentioned in the ayah. وَإِذَا ضَرَبْتُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ فَلَيْسَ عَلَيْكُمْ جُنَاحٌ أَن تَقْصُرُوا مِنَ الصَّلَاةِ. That was a pretty straightforward ayah right there. And you travel throughout the land and there's no blame upon you for shortening prayer. The Prophet ﷺ himself actually said, فرضت الصلاة ركعتين ركعتين في الحضر والسفر فأقرت صلاة السفر وزيد في صلاة الحضر. He said the salah was actually obligated by 2 by 2s in units of 2. Okay, both when in residence or on a journey. Then the prayer performed on a journey remained the same, that is in 2 rak'ahs, but the prayer that for non-travelers was actually increased. And of course, but the question is, when does a person in a situation of traveling begin their prayer to be shortened? Okay, when do they start shortening it? When they are outside of their place of residence, suburbs and city. Okay, so not because you intend to travel, it doesn't mean that you start shortening from the day that you intend to travel. Okay, so you don't intend to travel. Let's say your flight is at 2 p.m. Okay, your flight is at 2 p.m. and you're still considered within your area of residence. Okay, if your flight is at 2 p.m., that doesn't mean you already flew. Okay, your flight is at 2 p.m. You're still within your area of residence. You're not in a different country. Okay, and your flight is at 2 p.m. No, you're within the area of residence. Okay, your airport is probably, I don't know, half an hour away. That doesn't mean that you would begin shortening the prayer just because you left the house. Okay, when do you begin shortening the prayer? Once you leave the area of residence. Once you leave the area of residence. So what does that mean? Like suburb and the city? Yes, like the suburb and city. Okay, and okay, does that mean, well, I mean, if you're capable of performing and you already know that dhuhr is at 1:30, okay, pray. But people are boarding. If you're capable of praying, okay, while people are boarding and you're capable of making dhuhr tamam, meaning full, 4 rak'at dhuhr, then do so. But if not, then certainly if, hey, you might miss the prayer. They're already saying that they're calling on the last names. I was already late at, the TSA was thinking that I'm somehow, a dangerous person. It took a long time while they were on security and in that area. So, can't. Okay, well, get on your flight. And when it's within your ability to pray, okay, then you can pray. And then that situation, you could actually shorten the prayer. Let's say, and when, okay, so let's say, and now we got that one in place. Of course, what if a person is frequently traveling? Yes, they could, as long as they are traveling, whether frequently or rarely traveling, it doesn't make a difference. Okay, we're not talking about how many times they're going. We're actually talking about, are they permitted to shorten or not? Okay, here's another question. Can they actually combine prayers? That's actually a huge debate, okay, between scholars, especially the Hanafi. For the Hanafi, they regard that there's no such thing as combining a prayer, like Dhuhr and Asr together, and Maghrib and Isha together. They consider there's no such thing as doing that, except during al-Muzdalifah and during the time, not of course not Mina, but during Muzdalifah and during the time of Hajj. Okay, consider that would be the only time. No other times. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ had done it. Okay, But other scholars, they consider that no, you can combine between Dhuhr and Asr and combine between Maghrib and Isha. Like, what do you mean combine? Are we talking about combining, like praying Maghrib and Isha together? No, 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 no. That's not what it means. It means you're praying because you're a traveler. Pray because you're a traveler. Okay. Praying two for Dhuhr. And then Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, basically because you're done with Dhuhr and you're making it into a two because you're traveling. And then you're making Asr basically right after it. Okay. And because you're traveling too. But if a person is ill and they're combining, okay, then they're praying at 4, not 2. Because shortening the prayer from 4 to 2 is only permissible in the situation of a person on a journey. So if you say a person on a journey, like for how long? Let's say I'm visiting my daughter, who's married and lives in, I don't know, a different country. Okay. As long as you're not in your place of residence, then in that situation, you could actually shorten the prayer. As long as you're not in your place of residence, you can shorten the prayer. Even if that's 2 months, yes, that's not your residence. You don't call that home? Yeah, I don't call that home. Okay, you can shorten it. Even if it's for 2 months, even if it's 2 months. 3 months, 3 months. How about those that said 15 days? Yeah, there's an opinion 15 days. There's an opinion of 3 days. You've got those different opinions. I recognize those opinions. We recognize those opinions. But Wallahu a'lam, as long as you're not in your place of residence, then in that situation, you can shorten the prayer. Okay. So every single person that is basically on a journey, they can shorten the prayer. Which is better, for me to shorten the prayer or not shorten the prayer? Shortening the prayer is better. Why? Because that's the sunnah. That's what the Prophet ﷺ had done. Okay. So in that situation, you could shorten the prayer. The Prophet ﷺ was in Ghazwat Tabuk, and then he would even delay Dhuhr until he would basically get close to Asr, and then he would pray all of them like Dhuhr and Asr together. Okay, so that's basically to let us know that that was actually something that the Prophet ﷺ himself had done. Okay, if in other words, it's not a bid'ah. Okay, it's not a bid'ah. If a person is capable of getting up and going, let's say off their mean of transportation. Let's say you're going, let's say traveling, maybe, I don't know, Minnesota to Texas. Okay. And you have those rest stations, and, you know, they would have these rest stations all along on the highway. And, you know, sometimes, you know, you can have rest stations. You can even take a shower. Probably, yeah, there are rest stations. I've seen those in America. You could actually have rest stations. It would be a gas station. There's not only just a place for you know, filling your gas, but no, a place for to fill the gas, take a shower, maybe even like a small area for you to sleep in, and you know, drink your coffee or probably get food or whatever it is. And they would be huge gas stations. Those were actually the biggest gas stations I'd ever seen in my life. And they had those. Okay, if you're capable of doing that, well, good for you. But if you're not capable, and let's say you were going into an area that you knew was this area that basically is considered a conservative area, if you were to probably be seen praying in that area, that might be too dangerous for you, then in that situation you could pray sitting down. Okay, it would be, of course, you knowing the circumstance that you're in. Okay, of course, just meaning when we're combining Dhuhr and Asr, Maghrib and Isha, for whether it's a person that is ill, all of that, it's a considerable opinion. Okay, even though, of course, you know, praying on time is always best. Okay, and certainly Ibn Taymiyyah had said that all of this was to basically uplift the hardship on the ummah if in situations they needed to combine prayers, and all the different ahadith would basically would basically reflect that it would be permissible to basically uplift the hardship. Okay, if there is a situation where I couldn't pray, not even this kind of combination, it's a considerable opinion, but certainly praying on time is always best. Okay, if a person is not capable of doing this combination, okay, just like the hadith that spoke about for that mustahada, a woman that's going or undergoing, I guess, maybe having this continuous bleeding, constant bleeding right there, or probably somebody maybe going through urine leakage, or possibly dialysis, or possibly bleeding that would not stop, or nosebleed that would not stop. It would basically come and take the same ruling as in mustahada. Who's in mustahada? Mustahada is a woman that is having vaginal bleeding, but this vaginal bleeding is not postpartum, and neither is it a period. Okay, and the Prophet ﷺ had basically given her this tip. He said, إن قويت على أن تؤخر الظهر وتعجل العصر فتغتسلين ثم تصلين الظهر والعصر جميعا ثم تؤخرين المغرب وتعجلين العشاء ثم تغتسلين وتجمعين بين الصلاتين فافعلي. The Prophet ﷺ said, if you're capable, okay, let's go to that hadith. I want you to see it right there. The Prophet ﷺ basically told that Sahabiya that if you're capable of combining the prayers basically and delay dhuhr and then perform al-asr basically early, and then taghtasilin is not to make showers. Okay, taghtasilin is basically referring to wudu, and then praying dhuhr and asr together, and then praying maghrib and isha together, and then basically making wudu, and then praying or even combining between these two prayers and do so. Okay, so in other words, you can combine between maghrib and isha, because let's say severe rain and you were afraid your clothes are going to get too wet, you might get sick, all of that, just like Abu Bakr as-Siddiq basically combined between maghrib and isha because there was a lot of rain. Okay, so whether we're speaking about muddy ground, slippery roads, for example, it was too slippery to let everyone come in, and it was too slippery, for people to even pray jama'ah at the masjid. So in that situation, yes, certainly slippery roads, maybe heavy rains, maybe severe snowstorms or whatever it is, all of those things do actually permit that one would combine the prayers. Okay, and certainly even if that was in the masjid. Okay, and if somebody is permitted to do the al-jama', then doing al-jama' would also, in combining those, would basically be considered as the sunnah, where the Prophet ﷺ had done basically that combining during Muzdalifah, and had done combining during Arafah as well. Okay, so therefore that would be the sunnah to do that jama' during Arafah and Muzdalifah, even though they're actually going there for ibadah. But still, the Prophet ﷺ had basically made even that ibadah as something that they are capable of doing. Okay, I'm going to stop right here. So we're stopping at Salat al-Khawf, inshallah, prayer of fear. What does that mean? Like when I'm afraid of ghosts? No. Salat al-Khawf is during jihad. We'll talk about that in details, inshallah, next week. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. All right, so what I'll do, I'll stop the recording for those that is using misbah for doing tasbih a bid'ah? No, it's not, dear. Using a misbah and using the beads to do tasbih is not a bid'ah. The Prophet ﷺ was counting his numbers of tasbih, etc. So whether you were using your fingers or whether you were using the beads, that's permissible. Whether you were using, I guess, rocks and etc., it's not a bid'ah. You can count using those.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Sheikha, my question is regarding the traveler, the prayer of the traveler. So let's
Mhm.
say I go to my country for 2 months and I shorten my prayers, but then when I go to the masjid, I pray the full prayers. Would that be okay?
Oh, absolutely. That would be okay.
Okay. Jazakallah
Yeah,
khair.
absolutely. Wa iyyakum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Sheikh Aisha, how are you? Samira
Oh,
here.
alhamdulillah, doing great. Alhamdulillah.
Sheikh Aisha, I had a question for you. You mentioned that if you're traveling, doesn't matter if it's a month, 2 months, whatever, you can do qasr for as long as you're away from residence.
Right.
Okay, that's one opinion. And then you have the 15 days and 4 days. And so
3 days.
which is 3 days?
Yeah. Some had actually said 3 days. Another opinion, 15 days. Another opinion regarded that there's no limit as long as the person is not home and not a resident, and therefore they can shorten the prayer even if that is 2 years, if they're not a resident.
Was that conditional upon not knowing when you will return, or
That
because
is
that's
another opinion. That is another opinion that basically considered that condition that the person that continued to shorten the prayer for and it took 2 years. They considered that, well, it wasn't something that they had planned to stay for 2 years. It's that they basically were wanting to leave, but then the circumstances would then change, and it went on for as long as 2 years. So we're speaking about as long as your intention is that you're not a resident and a traveler, then you are basically within the perimeter of a musafir. You're on a journey and not a resident, and therefore you could actually do that qasr.
does it matter how your conditions are? Let's say that I have traveled to my aunt's house where I'm very comfortable and I am, very relaxed, lots of time and all that. Where it would be easy for me to do my sunan and everything, even still.
Right. So qasr al-salah is not dependent on how comfortable you are. Qasr al-salah is not dependent on how comfortable you are. Qasr al-salah is dependent on the actual travel. So are you a traveler? Yes, you are. Then you can do qasr, regardless of how easy and comfortable that was.
As long as you're not in residence, but I'm at a
Absolutely.
family member's house, let's say a
Absolutely.
brother's house or something.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, one thing to say is that the sunnah is not to pray sunan for those salawat,
Right,
except salat al-fajr. Okay?
right.
But
So,
if you
but
wanted to actually pray and stay, away from the differences of opinions, let's say, and you wanted to pray without qasr, that's a considerable opinion too.
okay, that was my next question. Which one is as you say, preponderant? Which is the preferred to?
So my preference, looking at the evidence, is if you're looking at you're staying and you're right now considering this stay as right now, let's say temporarily your home, I would say you're a resident temporarily at least.
So we would read full then.
Right. This is my
Oh,
recommendation. But the other opinions are valid opinions too.
okay. Okay, thank you, because we have this tussle between the family members all the time. So I just wanted to
Yeah.
clarify. Yeah. Okay.
The sister is asking, is it permissible to touch the mushaf without wudu? That's a huge debate between scholars on is the ayah لا يمسه إلا المطهرون. None shall touch it except those that are in a state of wudu. So that يمسه لا يمسه إلا المطهرون, that pronoun ha in يمسه or it, is that referring to Al-Quran? Is that referring to Al-Lawh al-Mahfuz? When Sayyida Aisha had said the Prophet ﷺ used to read the Quran ala kulli ahayinihi, that the Prophet ﷺ would read the Quran. Does that mean during the state of Janaba? Does that mean during the state of Tahara? Does that mean, what are we talking about? That's that differences of opinions between scholars. Some scholars like Ibn Hazm regarded that you could even read Quran even if you're in a state of Janaba. Other scholars, they said, no, you cannot even touch the Quran unless you actually have complete and full wudu. Okay, so I'm just laying out those valid opinions for you just to see, okay, if you were to have wudu, that would be best. If you don't have wudu, and that's a considerable opinion that you are reading the Quran without wudu, but we're talking about major impurity, minor impurity, and all of that. I'm just letting you know those differences of opinions between scholars. All right, so